All right. So founders were also leaders of the actual war, of the American Revolutionary War, also known as the War for Independence, which starts in 1775 and continues until 1783. Not going to go into a huge amount of detail here. The Patriots persevered through a long and very difficult war. The British, Britain was the world's leading naval power and a mighty military power as well. So it was really hard for George Washington to hold together a ragtag group of American underpaid soldiers through the war, but he managed it. The French actually came through in the clutch for us. The French were mad about getting beaten by the British in a couple of recent wars, and were looking for revenge. And the enemy of my enemy is my friend was their thinking. So they helped the United States get its independence. They sent thousands of French troops over here to fight. They also engaged the British in warfare back in Europe and over in Asia. So it's possible that the United States would not have gained its independence without help from the French. The painting, by the way, is George Washington crossing the Delaware en route to his first victory over the British in Trenton, New Jersey. Now, the founders are also, it doesn't just include people who were, connected to the resistance to Britain and the war that eventually separates the 13 colonies from Britain and creates the United States. The founders also include the framers, the people who designed the U.S. Constitution, who set up, the government we still have now, right? The framers wrote our current Constitution, which creates the presidency, mirroring the role of the king in the British government, Congress, mirroring Parliament in the British government, and then federal courts, the Supreme Court and other federal courts, which again mirror the role of English common law courts in Britain. So, again, the founders didn't think of themselves as inventing something totally new. What they're doing is they're refining, they're improving on the long-standing English and British political tradition. By now they do accept that they're being creative and they're doing some things that are new. It's not just about turning back the clock anymore. There's some creativity and innovation involved. One bit of innovation is the concept of federalism. Right. While there is a U.S. government, the U.S. government, also known as the federal government, the U.S. government is not all powerful. It doesn't micromanage everything that goes on down to the local level. Instead, the U.S. government is supreme. It is in charge, but it, in the Constitution, delegates a lot of powers to state governments, and so there are issues like education and local law enforcement, which are really the business of the state government, and the U.S. government is focused on more remote concerns, foreign policy and defending the borders, and so that's the concept of federalism, and not every country has that. A lot of countries have a centralized government that does micromanage everything, but the federalism is put into the Constitution because the 13 colonies had gotten used to doing things their own way, and they weren't all the same, and they didn't want to have to do everything the same way. They wanted there to be some local control, some home rule, some diversity in approaches among the 13 states, which are now, of course, up to 50 states. And lastly, the founders are leaders of the early republic, right? From the beginning of the country, when we start fighting the British in 1775 to when the last member of the founding generation leaves the White House, right? The gallery at bottom, those are the first 5 presidents of the United States, all of whom were founders, right? George Washington, after he leads the Continental Army to victory in the American Revolution, presides over he's a framer, he presides at the Constitutional Convention and becomes the first president of the United States. And he is succeeded by Adams, who was also a leader of the fight against Britain. And then Jefferson and Madison and Monroe is the last member of the founding generation to be president. So, broadly speaking, these, through 1825, we're talking about the founders. Now, all the action is not in the presidency. Up above, you've got a couple other important members of the founding generation. On the left, Alexander Hamilton, and on the right, his nemesis, Aaron Burr. So there you have it. Founders are, folks who are leading the struggle against Britain. First it's a political struggle, then it's a military struggle, and then the founders are people who set up the new government under the U.S. Constitution and leaders of the United States in the 1790s, in peacetime, in the 1790s and the 1800s and the 18 teens and the first half of the 1820s. And now the moment for which you've been waiting. What country did the founders envision anyway? What was their idea of the American future? Well, we can glean this by, first of all, we shouldn't expect the answer to be the same for all the founders. Just like people are different today and don't agree on everything, the founders were all over the map on this. So let's look at a few major founders and look at how their visions for the future were different. First, of course, Benjamin Franklin, one of the oldest of the founders. He is around for the resistance to Britain. He is promoting, it's actually Franklin who wins over the French and gets French help for the Americans during the war. And he's one of the framers of the Constitution and the first Postmaster General of the United States, founder of the U.S. Postal Service. Now, Franklin was a man of versatile talents. He was a scientist, he was an inventor, and he believed that the United States was going to continue to be, was going to emerge, I should say, as a leader in science and technology. Like most men of the Enlightenment, of the early centuries of the scientific revolution, he was a huge fan of science. There was a primitive vaccination technique back then called variolation. He was a fan. He actually failed to get one of his kids inoculated, and the child caught smallpox and died, and he always regretted that. So he was a great promoter of modern medicine as well. He saw literacy, reading as key to people being able to better themselves. And so he was a promoter of education, public schools, of libraries where you could borrow and read a book for free. This, Franklin was sure, this is how people who start out poor are going to get somewhere in life. He himself was from relatively modest backgrounds and was one of the very rare self-made men, or almost self-made men. Now, he had a dog in this hunt. One of the reasons Franklin wanted people to learn how to read is he was a great publisher, a publisher primarily of newspapers, but also of books. And so he was really interested in people being able to read, and he was a great champion of freedom of the press. Saw that as key to the functioning of a democracy. And lastly, Franklin was against slavery. Now, earlier in his life, he'd actually owned a few slaves, but as he matured and continued his studies of Enlightenment philosophy, he realized that slavery was wrong, that objectively, scientifically, there's not clear evidence that there was any meaningful difference between the races, and so he promoted, more than any other founder, promoted anti-slavery movements with success. Now, the southern colonies clung to slavery. Their economies were sort of built around slavery, but during and shortly after the American Revolution, the most of the North, this is now getting well beyond the Revolution in the animation. Sorry about that. The I was hoping it would start at the beginning, but it will cycle around to the beginning. Anyway, the key in the map is red areas are slave owning states, and blue areas are free states where slavery is not allowed. And there we are. So in the beginning, during and shortly after the Revolution, more and more northern states abolishing slavery. And that is in large part due to the influence of Franklin.